Voicemail came in while I was elbow deep in a sink full of dishes at the diner where I work mornings. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it ring out. It buzzed again 30 seconds later, and something about the persistence made me dry my hands on my apron and step into the back hallway by the walk-in freezer where it was quiet. "This is Marlowe," I said. "Mrs. Sutton?" "This is Greer Castellano. I'm the branch officer over at Pinecrest Federal." A woman's voice, careful. The kind of careful that tells you she's reading from a script she'd rather not be reading. "I'm calling about the property on Tamarack Road." My stomach did a slow turn. Tamarack Road was the cabin. 40 acres of pine and one stubborn little A-frame my late husband built with his own hands the summer before our daughter was born. It was the one thing I'd kept after everything fell apart, the one thing I never talked about, because talking about it invited people in, and I'd learned the hard way that some people, once invited, never leave. "What about it?" I said. There was a pause on her end. I could hear a keyboard clicking. "It was refinanced 4 days ago. There's a new loan recorded against it." I leaned my shoulder into the cold steel of the freezer door. "That's not possible. I didn't refinance anything." "I understand, ma'am. That's actually why I'm calling you directly instead of mailing a notice." Another pause. The clicking stopped. "The application lists you as the borrower, but the parties who came in and signed the closing documents were listed as your daughter and your son-in-law." I didn't say anything. I want to be honest about that. A lot of people, when they tell these stories later, they make themselves sound shocked, like the betrayal came out of a clear blue sky. It didn't. The first thing I felt wasn't surprise. It was a tired kind of recognition. Like hearing a song you hoped you'd forgotten and realizing you still know every word. "Mrs. Sutton, are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Say that again." "My daughter signed for me. They presented documents indicating they had authority to act on your behalf. A signed authorization, identification. The file went through our processing center, not this branch, which is part of the reason it wasn't caught sooner." She lowered her voice. "Ma'am, there are some irregularities in this file. I'd really like you to come in, today, if you can." I looked at the clock over the prep station. 11:15. I had a 4-hour shift left and a manager who docked you if you so much as sneezed off the clock. "Give me 45 minutes, I said. I told Donnie I had a family emergency, which was true in the worst way, and he grumbled but waved me off. I drove the whole way with both hands tight on the wheel, not crying, not yelling, just running the math in my head. Because that's what you do when your kid has spent 30 years teaching you that love and arithmetic are the same thing. You count. My daughter is named Cleo. She's 31. I had her young, raised her mostly alone after her father passed when she was 6. Worked doubles so she could have the cleats and the prom dress and the community college tuition she dropped after 1 semester. I'm not telling you that to make her sound like a monster. I'm telling you because for most of my life, I believed that if you pour enough into a child, the love comes back out the other side. I believed that right up until the moment Greer Castellano said the words, "your daughter and your son-in-law," and the belief just quietly died, like a pilot light going out. The son-in-law is named Bram. He married Cleo 2 years ago in a backyard ceremony I paid half of. He's the kind of man who calls you Mama Sutton, and means it the way a fox means it when it tells the henhouse it's just passing through. Pinecrest Federal was a low brick building with a flag out front and a row of dying marigolds in the bed by the door. Greer met me in the lobby. She was younger than her voice, maybe 35, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a manila folder hugged against her chest like it was something she didn't want to be holding. She took me back to her office and shut the door. That part mattered to me later when I thought about it. She shut the door. She didn't make me stand at a teller window airing my whole life out where the people waiting on their lunch break deposits could hear it. "I'm going to show you the file," she said. "I need you to tell me what's true and what isn't. Don't guess. If you don't know, say you don't know." She turned the monitor toward me. The first thing she pulled up was the authorization. A power of attorney, it claimed, granting Cleo the right to handle all financial and real property matters on my behalf. My name was at the top. My signature was at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Somebody had practiced. The C in Marlowe was right. The long tail on the E was right. But the whole thing leaned the wrong way, like handwriting does when a person is copying instead of remembering. I've signed my name maybe 100,000 times in my life. I know the way my own hand moves. This wasn't it. That's forged, I said. I never signed that. I've never given anyone power of attorney over anything. Greer nodded slowly, and I watched her make a small note. Then she scrolled down and her face changed. There's a notary stamp, she said. I leaned in. The stamp was filled out completely. Commission number. A name. Notarized this day in the county of Halverson. I read the notary's name twice before it landed, and when it did, my throat went dry. Delphine. Delphine was Bram's aunt, a woman who'd shown up to the wedding with a beaded handbag and a laugh too loud for the size of the yard, and who Cleo had once mentioned, offhand, does notary stuff on the side. I remember thinking nothing of it at the time. I remembered it now like a splinter you don't notice going in until you press on it. I know her, I said. She's his aunt. The son-in-law's aunt. Greer's pen stopped moving. You're certain? I sat across from her at Thanksgiving. I'm certain. She typed something, then leaned back an inch, the way people do when a thing they suspected just got worse. Mrs. Sutton, a notary can't notarize a signature unless the signer is physically present. If you were never in the room, and this is her stamp, that's not a clerical error. That's notarial fraud. What did they take? I said. Because I've been counting the whole drive over, and I needed the number. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Before I show you this, I want you to understand what it means. If this is what I think it is, the destination of these funds isn't just embarrassing. It's evidence. Show me, she clicked. This wasn't a refinance to get me a better rate, the way you'd help an aging parent lower a payment. This was a cash out. They'd borrowed against 40 acres of land that had been paid off for 12 years. Land my husband died still proud of. And they'd structured it to pull money out. A lot of money. Enough that when the number loaded on the screen, I had to put my hand flat on her desk to steady myself, because it was more than I'd earned in the last 6 years of standing on my feet flipping eggs. Where did it go? I said. Greer didn't answer right away. She opened another window, a wire instruction. She read it and I watched her jaw tighten, the way a person does when they're angry but trained not to show it. The proceeds were set to disperse by wire, she said. Yesterday, at close of business. She turned the screen a careful few degrees away from the glass wall, to an account at another bank. Under the name, she zoomed in. Cedar Wind Holdings. I've never heard of it. No, she said quietly. I didn't think you had. She clicked again, and a beneficiary field populated, and her eyes went still. The signatory on the Cedar Wind account is your son-in-law. I sat back. I remember the chair creaked. I remember the marigolds outside the window, half dead, and a kid in the parking lot dropping a juice box. The small, dumb details your brain grabs onto when the big thing is too big to hold. Because here's what I understood in that chair, and it was worse than the money. The money I could almost forgive. People get desperate. People get desperate. People do stupid things. But you don't set up a shell company to receive the proceeds. You don't practice a signature. You don't bring in an aunt with a notary stamp. That takes planning. That takes weeks. Which meant that every Sunday dinner for the last however long, every time Cleo had called just to check in, every time Bram had said, Mama Sutton, you work too hard. You should let us help you with the property paperwork. They'd already been building this. They'd been smiling at me with the blueprint already drawn. Why didn't they go through? I said. You said yesterday. It's been 4 days. Why is the money still? I couldn't finish. Because the file tripped a compliance flag before release, Greer said. We placed a hold. The wire is scheduled, not sent. She looked at me. If you'd gotten a letter in the mail next week instead of a phone call today, we'd be having a very different conversation. The money would be gone, and recovering it would be a years-long fight. I let out a breath. I think I'd been holding since the freezer hallway. What flagged it? I asked. She turned the monitor back toward herself and scrolled, and that's when her face did the thing. Not a gasp, just a slow, careful stillness, like a person realizing the floor they're standing on is thinner than they thought. The closing wasn't handled in-house, she said. It was run through a third-party signing agent, a facilitator who coordinates the documents, brings them to the signers, gets everything packaged. She clicked into a participant record and a small panel opened with a name, a license number, and across the top of it, in a band of red, a line of text. And this particular facilitator is someone we flagged before. I leaned forward. Flagged for what? For pushing through closings that don't sit right, files that move too fast, with signers who can't quite be reached afterward. She read the red banner and then she read it again, and I watched her decide something. Mrs. Sutton, I shouldn't say this much, but I'd want someone to tell my own mother. She turned the monitor. The facilitator's name was Renwick Pace. It meant nothing to me. I told her so. It might mean something to your son-in-law, she said, because the only reason a fraudulent file lands on this person's desk is that somebody requested them by name. People like this don't get assigned at random. They get chosen. And there it was. The thing the bank manager had been circling the whole time, careful not to say outright until she was sure. This wasn't my daughter and her husband getting in over their heads and reaching for an easy fix. This was my family hiring a professional, a man who does this for a living, who has a system, who has done it to other people's parents, other people's land. My 40 acres weren't a one-time temptation. They were a job. Greer picked up the phone on her desk. I'm placing a rescission hold and escalating this to our fraud unit, she said, half to me and half to whoever answered. Forged power of attorney, disputed signature, notarial fraud, and a flagged facilitator on the closing packet. No, do not release the wire. Freeze it! She hung up and looked at me. I also have to tell you that you should not contact your daughter or your son-in-law about this. Not a phone call, not a text. If they know we've caught it, the first thing they'll do is try to clean up the trail. They're going to figure it out, I said. They're expecting that money tomorrow. Let them wonder, she said. Let the bank be the one who's quiet. I want to tell you I felt avenged sitting there. I didn't. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged the furniture. My daughter, the baby I'd nursed through croup at 2 a.m, the girl whose hand I'd held in the hospital parking lot the day we buried her dad. She had sat in a room, picked up a pen, and signed my name to a lie, and she'd practiced first. I drove home, and I didn't call anybody. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off until it got dark, and the not calling was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than the doubles, harder than the funeral, because every instinct a mother has was screaming at me to call my child and ask her why, to give her a chance to explain, to find the version of the story where she wasn't the villain. But I'd spent 30 years building those versions for her. The dropped semester wasn't her fault. The money that went missing from my purse in her teens wasn't really stealing. The loans I co-signed and ended up paying were just bad luck. I'd been her defense attorney her whole life, free of charge, and look where it had landed me. So I sat in the dark and I let myself be quiet for once. And it felt like grief, because it was. The next morning, Greer called and asked me to come back in. There was a man with her this time, in a sport coat that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. A county investigator named Sol Marchetti. He had a kind, tired face and a folder thicker than Greer's. Mrs. Sutton, he said, shaking my hand. I'm not going to make you relive the emotional part. I need the boring part. Dates, times. Who called you? What you signed and didn't sign. Whether you've ever been to a notary with your daughter present. He gave a small smile. Boring is what wins these. Juries don't believe drama. They believe records. So I gave him the boring part. I told him about Thanksgiving and the aunt with the stamp. I told him I'd never signed a power of attorney in my life. I told him about the cabin, the 40 acres, the 12 years it sat free and clear. He wrote it all down, and at one point he stopped me and asked, very gently, Has your daughter asked you for money recently? In the last year? I thought about it. She asked me to invest in a business. I said, her husband's thing, some kind of land development company. I said no. I didn't have it to give, and something about it felt wrong. Marchetti and Greer looked at each other. Cedarwind Holdings, he said. I nodded slowly as the pieces clicked. When I wouldn't hand them the money, they decided to take the land out from under it instead. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved in a way that surprised me. because I'd grown up believing the system only ever moved slow for people like me. But fraud has its own gravity once it's documented. The signing agent, Renwick Pace, turned out to be exactly what Greer suspected. When investigators pulled his other files, mine wasn't the only one. There were at least 4 other properties, all of them belonging to older people, all of them with the same too smooth paperwork and signers who couldn't quite be found after the fact. His credentials were suspended, then revoked. They executed a warrant on his office and his devices, and what they found on them did more talking than any witness could. The aunt, Delphine, lost her notary commission within days. It turned out she'd stamped a stack of things she had no business stamping, and once the state's notary board got involved, her cooperation became a lot more enthusiastic. She gave a statement. In it, she described being asked to notarize my power of attorney by my son-in-law with the document already signed, and me nowhere in the building. That single sentence was a brick through the whole wall. Bram didn't get to hide behind being charming. The Cedar Wind account, the shell he'd built to catch the money, became the thing that sank him. You can talk your way out of a lot of things, but you cannot talk your way out of being the named signatory on the account that was set to receive the proceeds of a forged loan. The investigators tied the structure directly to him. He was charged with multiple counts: mortgage fraud, conspiracy, identity-related offenses. The pattern made it ugly for him. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And my daughter, Cleo. I went back and forth for a long time about whether I wanted her charged. Marchetti told me in his kind, tired way that it wasn't really up to me, that the bank's footage from the closing showed her sitting at the table signing my name, and that the appointment logs and her own messages told the rest. But he asked me anyway, the way a decent man asks whether I'd be willing to make a statement on her behalf. A mitigation, something a judge might read. I sat with that for 3 nights. In the end, I didn't write it. Not out of spite. I want to be careful about that, because the easy version of this story is the one where I burn it all down and feel powerful. That's not what happened. What happened is I realized that every time I'd soften the consequences for her, I hadn't been loving her. I'd been teaching her that there weren't any, that the worst thing she could do, somebody else me would always quietly clean up. The kindest thing I had left to give her was the truth she'd never been handed, that actions land, that my name was not hers to sign, that I was a person and not just a resource with a pulse. She called me once before her arraignment. The phone rang and her name lit up the screen. The name I'd chosen for her in a hospital bed 31 years ago, and I let it ring. Not because I'd stopped loving her, I don't think you ever stop, but because, for the first time in my life, I loved her without paying for it. The refinance was formally rescinded. The forged loan was canceled for fraud. The county recorder kept a hold on the deed until the bank's correction documents were recorded, and then the fraudulent entry was struck, and the title went back to reading what it had always truly read: my name, just mine. The cash out never dispersed. The wire never moved. I put a fraud watch on the property and a freeze on my credit, and I filed a no-contact order, which my own lawyer, a brisk woman named Imagine Hartley, who took my case for less than she should have, walked me through line by line. I learned things I wish somebody had told me 20 years ago, that you can lock your title, that you can set an alert with the county so that if anyone records anything against your property, you get a notice the same day, that the deed your husband sweated over isn't automatically safe. Just because it's paid off, it turns out, is exactly what makes it a target. A month after it was over, I drove out to Tamarack Road by myself. I stood in the doorway of the A-frame for a long while before I went in, not because I was afraid of the house. The house had never done anything but hold me. I stood there because my body needed a minute to learn that it was still mine, that no one had taken it, that the floor my husband sanded by hand was going to be under my feet for as long as I wanted it there. I went in. I opened the windows and let the pine smell move through. I sat in the chair he made and I cried. Finally, the way I hadn't let myself cry in the bank or the kitchen or the investigator's office. Not for the money. The money was nothing. I cried for the daughter I thought I had, and for the mother I'd been who made her, and for the long, slow work of figuring out which parts of that I could set down. If your child or anyone you love came to you tomorrow smiling, asking you to just sign here, just let them handle the paperwork. Just trust them with the deed. Would you do what I almost did and call them first? Give them the chance to explain it away? Or would you do what saved me and go straight to the bank and the county before you said a single word? Tell me in the comments what you'd do. And if you got land or a home that's paid off and sitting quiet, lock your title this week. Don't wait for the phone call. I'll see you in the next one. For 30 years, I believed love was something you measured in how much you were willing to absorb. Every dropped class, every missing 20 from my purse, every loan I quietly paid off for Cleo, I called all of it love. I told myself a good mother carries what her child can't, and that belief is exactly how I ended up sitting in Greer's office, staring at my own name signed by someone else's hand. Cause and effect are not cruel. They're just honest. I had spent 3 decades teaching my daughter that there were no real consequences, that someone would always smooth the road behind her. And one day, she simply applied that lesson to 40 acres of pine and her late father's deed. What saved that cabin wasn't luck. It was the one moment I chose to do the hard thing instead of the soft one. When Greer told me not to call Cleo, every instinct I had screamed to pick up the phone, to give my child the chance to explain it away like I always had. Sitting in the dark of my kitchen and not making that call was the strongest thing I have ever done. Not loud strength. The quiet kind. The kind that holds still when everything in you wants to move. I think now that the people who get taken advantage of are rarely foolish. They're loving people who never learn that love without a spine is just an invitation. The honesty came when I finally let my daughter be a grown woman responsible for her own pen. The clear thinking came when I stopped writing excuses for her and started reading the documents in front of me. The leaning signature, the aunt's notary stamp, the shell account under Bram's name. And the backbone came when I let the truth land where it belonged instead of catching it one more time. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Protect the people you love by refusing to lie for them, not by lying harder. Look at the paperwork even when it's family asking you to look away, especially then. And when the moment comes where doing right means doing the painful thing, choose the pain. It costs less than the alternative. I almost lost the only place my husband's hands still lived because I was a soft place for everyone but myself. I drove out to Tamarack Road last week and sat in the chair he built, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like loss. It felt like ground that was finally mine to stand on. I didn't get there by being harder than the people who hurt me. I got there by being clearer than the lie they built, steadier than the fear that almost made me warn them, and honest enough at last to let my daughter become accountable for the woman she chose to be.